My concern is that people right now think you have to have AI just to show potential customers that you're on the cutting edge. So we'll do it, and then we'll figure out why we're doing it at some later time. And if that's the case, then it's virtually impossible to imagine that you're going to make good decisions except by dumb luck.
There's a ton of pressure for companies and the management teams to make investments and fast. And to Barry's point about the framework of thinking about what will work and how will work, a lot of shortcuts are taken without clear purpose, a way to really measure, gauge whether or not something is going to work and how it will work, whether or not it's going to impact the other sides of the organization. I should say majority of the time these are ignored because the teams need to move really fast.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today in the podcast Ready to Transform. Today, we're going to talk about how smart organizations make poor AI choices. We have wonderful guests today, beginning with Barry Schwartz. Barry is a professor emeritus of psychology at Swarthmore College and a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. He is a psychologist, 40 years of research experience, many great books like The Paradox of Choice, Practical Wisdom, and Why We Work. He's an expert on decision-making and choice overload and practical wisdom in professional context. Barry, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Robert.
Thank you. We also have Seref Turkmenoglu, and I hope I did justice your last name, Seref. He's the managing partner at Activate Consulting. As the managing partner, he works with CEOs and senior teams around technology, internet, media, e-commerce companies, developing strategies for growth, building new businesses as internal startups. And the client portfolio includes companies in software, tech platforms, media, e-commerce, etc. Before his job as managing director at Activate, he held management positions at Walt Disney, NDC Partners, and the Economist Group. Thanks for being here, Seref.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. And then I have my colleague and our co-founder of Pandatron, Lauri Paloheimo. He is the co-founder and head of change at Pandatron. I have to say, knowing Lauri, he's a visionary, leader and co-founder of Pandatron, extensive experience in agile, lean, change, and business coaching. And he leads our content development and our change practice. And of course, he is part of our executive team. So Lauri, great to have you here as well.
Yeah, happy to be here on my own podcast. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad you made it.
It wasn't easy. But
yeah,
here
I know.
I am.
Lauri has been doing a labor camp in Konkan the last, I don't know how many days, so I'm glad he actually did that.
They are also called hackathons. In an instance, someone gets concerned of our practices of production.
Yeah, so, yeah. We didn't need labor camp like in the traditional evil way of labor camp. But let's get to to the topic. And Lauri, I would really appreciate if you could spend maybe about a minute setting us up for the context of the conversation today, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So basically, what we want to discuss today is that what is the difference between wise and foolish AI adoption, where if we look into the current status quo, it seems that almost every enterprise on earth is putting AI on the top charts of their strategic priorities. However, if we look at the actual implementation statistics, most of them provide meager results, and in many instances, the projects in AI adoption don't even get started properly. And I think that many people are extremely overloaded. There is huge amount of misinformation. There is a huge amount of FOMO, as they call it, fear of missing out. And in a sense, the human element, the deep human element of why this matters for me is getting lost in the picture as we are looking at it as a purely linear and technical question, which is why we have a person like Barry, who has been doing this tremendous work throughout his career of many concepts such as paradox of choice and practical wisdom and meaningful work that can help us understand what might be the difference between wise and foolish AI adoption. That's why we're here.
Thank you for that. And, that's a great thing of Barry. We were at the a World Economic Forum in Davos, and everywhere we went to, the topic was AI adoption. Everybody was saying, we need to adopt AI, but, you have a great book, The Paradox of Choice. Can you maybe put the two together in terms of the choices we're having to make as it reflects to AI and AI adoption, Barry?
Sure. So the paradox of choice is a summary of evidence that's accumulated for over 20 years now, that although choice is good and choice enhances freedom, there can be too much of a good thing. And when there is too much of a good thing, instead of liberating people, it paralyzes people. They can't pull the trigger. They can't make a decision. They're sure that whatever decision they make, they'll be leaving something better on the table. And it's challenging because that suggests that we need to find what I have come to call a sweet spot, the right amount of choice. No choice, life is barely worth living. Too much choice, life seems to be impossible to live. And where is the sweet spot? And there's no simple answer to that question. So you need to figure it out in a case-by-case basis, basically, depending on what it is you're producing. And with regard to technology, some years ago, shortly after my book first came out, there was a debate. It was early days when it came to technology for amateurs. And there was a trade-off in lots of technology between what they called capability on the one hand and usability on the other. Capability meant that the software or the hardware was so flexible and so powerful that whatever came down the road, you could adapt to it. Usability meant that it's basically plug and play. There was a trade-off between them, and people wanted capability. The last thing they wanted was to buy something and then 6 months later, it's basically a relic. But the trouble is that when they bought things for capability, they couldn't figure out how to use them. So mostly they sat in boxes in people's closets. And I think right now we're at another place where that distinction will loom very, very large. What's it for? How can you use it? How easy is it to use? Rather than, is this something that can be used no matter what the future world turns out to be? And because that's what people seem to want, it gives them an array of options that I think they find overwhelming, confusing, and debilitating. So that's what the paradox of choice is.
That kind of reminds me of how I feel when I go to one of those Chinese buffets. It's like I see all these options and then I stand there and I don't know, so many choices, so many.
But the nice thing about a buffet is that you can have A and B. You may end up with an upset stomach at the end of the night, but you can choose, you can have one of everything. It's not true when it comes to buying technology.
Yeah, but that kind of gets me thinking, maybe to you, Seref, are we seeing organizational indigestion, to use the buffet analysis, right? Where maybe they're building so much capability, but usabilities in there, and you have extensive experience of this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, certainly. And we see it from both ends. So we are working with the companies that are developing applications, and then, of course, a majority of our work is with the corporations that are trying to take advantage of, leverage these technologies. On both ends, it's really the paradox of choices. And it is because whether it's the investors, the boards, the executive management, there's a ton of pressure for companies and the management teams to make investments and fast. They understand something big is coming, and they have to reposition. So one way or another, they have to act. They have to report on it. They have to communicate on it. And that leads to some shortcuts. And to Barry's point about the framework of thinking about what will work and how will work, a lot of shortcuts are taken as to, without clear purpose, a way to really measure, gauge whether or not something is going to work and how it will work, whether or not it's going to impact the other sides of the organization. Another level of talent will be required, structural changes will be required. I should say majority of the time, these are ignored because the teams need to move really fast.
Let me interrupt and ask you maybe something around that. So Do you feel
Yes.
that maybe, out there in the world of business, maybe there is sort of this race to get there first, to the point that there is maybe way too many things that they're doing and it just becomes, almost irrelevant? Is really so much capability and usability isn't there because of
Yeah.
that race?
That race is applicable more to the first side of what I mentioned as the creators of these applications.
Okay.
The race. From the user's standpoint, the pressure is a little different. It's really the will or the really challenge to adapt to the times and make sure that whatever is happening out there and that will impact their business, whether it's about efficiency or effectiveness, they get used to it and they somehow take advantage of it. So it's different priorities and different reasons.
So what we're saying is that there are two choices here. One is the choice of the buyer. The other one is the choice of the user, if you will. Now, Lauri, I want to go to you when it comes to this choices that we're confronting. How does Pandatron address that both for the buyer and the user, which you say in terms of the frameworks that you build?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as a context, my work is like very, very heavily influenced by the Japanese way of coaching and Japanese way of thinking as well, as we work with actually quite plenty of Fortune 500 companies in Japan. And in Japan, they have this way where they, instead of thinking about what to add, they start from what to take away in order to actually perfect something. This might be very familiar to many listeners as the lean methodology, which is one expression of this way of thinking. So basically, we can use this subtractive way of thinking by using the AI coach and helping the users to think through their workflows, think through what kind of repetition there is, what kind of wastefulness there is, what is causing frustration, what is causing, this constant sense that there must be a better way. And starting from there and reducing the amount of trivial choices in their own work, that is something that immediately makes AI something that is actually relevant and an aid for them. Instead of starting from the infinite amount of options of what you can do with AI, you instead start from what not to do and start building up from there. And that is actually something that seems to be quite mind-blowing perspective to many users who are not used to that. You can even start from this negation way of thinking.
Yeah, I should have said at the beginning, because I work with Lauri, I probably kind of glossed over Pandatron. And Pandatron, is an organization that build this platform that deploys AI change agents in organizations, leveraging systemic coaching to accelerate transformations and executive strategy or corporate strategy, if you will. But I think Seref and Barry wanted to say something about that. So I'm going to go with Barry first, and then we go
Okay. What Lauri just said, it strikes me, illustrates a central problem. Whether you're adding or taking away, you start with an articulation of purpose. What's the change for?
Yes.
And maybe that will lead you to add. Maybe it'll lead you to take away, but you have a reason for making change. And my concern is that people right now think you have to have AI just to show potential customers that you're on the cutting edge. So we'll do it, and then we'll figure out why we're doing it at some later time. And if that's the case, then it's virtually impossible to imagine that you're going to make good decisions except by dumb luck. So when you take purpose out of the decision, then the choice problem becomes overwhelming because you don't know even what criteria to use in evaluating these various things, even if you have the technical expertise. And that's what I think is happening. I'll just say one thing. I love Google. I'm a huge fan of Google. But now they have this AI component. So when you do a search, you get a little AI summary at the top. The AI summary is virtually a verbatim transcript of one of the highest ranked sites that you come down to. So it adds zero And Google, of all companies, you wouldn't think they needed to prove that they were at the cutting edge, but here they are, wasting 5 seconds of my time scrolling this AI, which is just exactly what I'm going to encounter, 3 inches below on the search result. So that seems to me to be the danger that enterprises have to confront. They need to know why first.
So it can't be build it and we will use it. And there's a race like ready, shoot, aim. Seref, I don't know if you wanted to add something to that, but by all means.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can't agree more with the framework that Barry, of course, laid out about a clear problem statement, knowing how to really deal with it, and metrics to really effectively measure whether or not an AI investment is working. What I will add to it is that, and Lauri talked about really you working, Pandatron working with top Fortune 500 companies. They are not created the same. Some of them are much more used to experimentation, and they are much more adaptable. Even though they may be similar in size, they just know how to really adopt the new technology, implement it, roll it out, scale it in their organizations. Whereas some industries are just much slower moving. But all of them are now expected to move fast. So for some, the level of change and the challenge is very different. In those cases, even forget about AI, it's just being able to understand this, comprehend this, put it in some sort of a framework, and to understand what an ROI will mean, because it can be direct, can be indirect, it can be about automation, but it can be changing the entire workflow and the fiber of a company. So there is a magnitude of changes, and it's just not the same for the companies that are involved. Even if we can group them as Fortune 500, the challenges are quite unique to each and every one of them.
Interesting. And we could go on this topic forever, but I think we're maybe 10, 12 minutes onto the podcast. And I want to shift a little. We talked, if you will, both buyers and users, and I want to focus more on users. And Barry, I want to go back to sort of one of your books, which is Why We Work, reflecting on the meaning of work. When you think about, the speed of change is what has changed. Change has always been there. What has changed is, in the question is the speed, right? Now it's not 1x, it's like 100x. What impact does that have in how people feel in making work meaningful, whether it's technology, what kind of perhaps sense of ambivalence or uncertainty does it create on them, and what impact do you think that has in organizations?
Well, I certainly think that the speed of change is a major problem for people, especially for people of a certain age. I won't mention what age that is, but it doesn't necessarily affect meaning in work. It seems to me that meaning in work comes from both an appreciation of and a support of the purpose of the enterprise. So you could start with, why are we starting this business? What's the reason? If the reason is to make money, then chances are pretty good that people who work for you are going to have a hard time finding meaning in work. If the reason is to solve some problem, then it's a whole different story. And if AI helps you to solve that problem, then it'll enable people to get even more meaning, because they'll be able to spend more of their day doing the hard things, because the easy things are being taken care of automatically. My concern is that you let the tool shape the telos, to use an old-fashioned Aristotelian word. If the tool shapes the purpose instead of the purpose shaping the tool, well, then all bets are off about whether the new technology is going to enhance or decrease the meaning people get out of work. And to pick up on something Seref said about how you figure out what the costs and benefits are, suppose the cost of AI adoption is that you undercut the sort of morale of the workforce. They feel less autonomy, less control. They feel like they're making a smaller contribution. That is unlikely to be reflected in any direct way when you're trying to cost out the efficacy of AI. But it may well have a huge effect on the bottom line, because people who show up to work every day uninspired do worse work. And so way downstream, you may find that despite the productivity benefits that AI introduces, you're not more productive because people don't want to come to the office anymore.
So let me go to Lauri. Lauri, I'm really interested in, because you see, of course, they're anonymized, but you see a lot of the coaching conversations with people as they're reflecting on change and AI adoption. What can you glean for that to share with us in terms of, are people sort of losing track of their meaning of work and why they work, and how is then this exercise helping them maybe find their purpose again, or is it not really happening?
Absolutely. I say? Uh, there have been so many points I would want to comment, but I think that there is
Take a few.
definitely
We got
this some kind of almost like a mania when it comes to AI, where in a sense people are rushing ahead for the AI for the sake of AI itself, instead of AI, as Barry was saying, for the sake of solving an actual problem that provides value to some person who wants more of something or less of something. And I actually think that that's precisely why we need to use AI to not rush ahead, but slow down and actually think, what is the bottom line? What do we need? What is the right thing at the right place at the right time, to quote Barry's work on practical wisdom, which is like an old school Aristotelian way of thinking, but it's classic for a reason. Like, even though we have thinking machines, we cannot outsource thinking for them fully, especially when it comes to these questions of what actually matters, what is the bottom line, who am I serving, and how can I actually delight them and solve their problems. So when we introduce AIs as coaches, and instead of, just being these tools for simple purposes, they function as reflection partners and ask, how are you, for example, leading your employees? How are you serving your customers? What kind of a person you are becoming through these actions in this company? Where do you want to grow in this career with the help of AI, et cetera, et cetera? That already gives people this space and time that they really need to figure out what is actually necessary. So by deliberately slowing down for just 10 to 20 minutes, they stop wasting their energy. They start focusing on what actually matters. There's this great saying in Finnish called sählääminen, which basically is a verb that means that you are spreading out energy everywhere all at once, and therefore you gain no results. And I think there is quite a lot of sählääminen going on in most
we use that term
organizations.
in the US all the time. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So by deliberately slowing down a little bit, we actually speed up way ahead, especially once we do that on scale. That's, if we go into my personal motives behind Pandatron, like I remember a couple of years ago when I started seeing these first videos of how AI is getting embedded into organizations where they had these intelligent machines that were observing people doing their work and measuring their productivity as if humans were just objects that can be, what I say, where they don't have the dignity to think for themselves what to do better. That kind of got me very alarmed that, okay, so we do have two paths here, where one is that we increase our agency with the help of AIs, or we slowly start withering away while we have machines that basically are just accelerating that process, which I think is dangerous. And many people are extremely alarmed and extremely scared, and for good reasons. And I don't think most organizations really understand that they actually need to come back to these people with a certain sense of compassion and helping them think through that how these AIs are going to provide value for them.
But Lauri, I guess what I want to know, are you seeing in the flow and conversations sort of like a path of rediscovery of coaches in, the reason for being there, why we work or why we're here? Are they finding that alignment? Is that discovery happening, you think, through the experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's kind of like where we have seen that, for example, the AI, when it transfers the company values from the wall into everyday decisions of people, where people are actually asked that, what do these principles that we figured out 100 years ago, what do they mean today, or do they mean anything? And people actually get to think about that on a weekly basis. It definitely does somehow decrease this sense of alienation and increase this sense of choice, that I can make meaningful choice. I can take ownership of my career. I can actually focus my attention on solving meaningful problems. You, in a sense, become more aware of the context you are embedded in, of how you are influencing others around you, but also how they are influencing around yourself as well, which is very important to know and understand.
And let me switch to Seref over here, because you have large corporate clients, and you see both sides. You see the buyer and you see the user. Where do you see the gap, if you will, between both? Right? You find that maybe executives are not really thinking of the why we work. They're just sort of doing the corporate strategy and perhaps not thinking what happens to the everyday user and how they personally feel and find meaning? Or is that, just being too philosophical over here?
No, so I want to go back to Barry's point about purpose first and foremost. That's really where it starts, and that also may be the point where it starts to go wrong. Meaning, in the world of, let's say, media, creative kind of domains, when you think about the technologies that are really being used to create experiences, and technology is the center of that experience, those kind of technologies always failed. I can give you a recent example is the virtual reality. We had virtual reality and then tried to figure out what to do with it, and it didn't work. It didn't take off. It's one of the reasons, very much the core reason why it didn't. And to Barry's point about understanding that AI is there to empower. AI is there to make you more effective, more efficient, but it is not necessarily the purpose itself. It is the tool. It is the way to get there. And when we think about the magnitude of change that it will bring, because if it's just a feature or functionality that is added by AI, it's very different. If it is something of an agentic AI nature, which is going to replace or change the entire workflow, the operating kind of principles and the model of your business, then you have to think about, okay, so how the impact is going to be on the people and the processes, my way of really serving my clients, customers. There is a ton of questions depending on what you're trying to do that you have to answer. And if you don't get to that level of detail, it fails. It has to be a clear set of goals with clear metrics, and then an understanding of when you implement, when you try to enable, when you try to adopt, there's gonna be a period where you will have to experiment, pivot, refine, and then come back to it. Chances are you won't get it right the first time. This is not a magic wand. It is something to be worked on. So that's where most people get it wrong. This is not a panacea, that you have to work on it to make it effective.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think, what we see oftentimes when it comes to AI adoption and major transformations, we like to say that we spend a lot of time with, senior executives and consultants. We may do workshops for middle management, but this concept of, why we work sometimes get lost, because as we're going through these major transformations, we're probably just mass messaging everybody else because of, financial reasons. We need to build rules around, AI. And for that, we need to be wise. And is not a plug on another one of your books, Barry, but you have a great book called Practical.
One more thing to add there. That is one of the reasons, because when we think about Pandatron, and we are all about practical recommendations. One of the reasons, and we have a very high bar for this, we are able to recommend Pandatron to our clients because the purpose of the application is very clear. Like what it does for organizations, how you scale internal communication, make it consistent, and when you try to adopt new technologies, really drive change forward, and do it in small, big, medium size, it doesn't matter, organizations, in a way that scales fast. It is a very clear purpose and a use case. So I want to just drop this note here because, again, it's not so easy for us to do this with our clients, but we don't have any reservations of recommending Pandatron for that reason.
Thank you. And Lauri didn't pay any money to Seref for that plug, just like Barry's not paying me for plugging his book either. So Barry, I wanted to go back here and ask you, practical wisdom. How do you think organizations can develop practical wisdom around AI adoption?
Well, so the point of the book, Practical Wisdom, was an argument that we have somehow convinced ourselves that a set of rules, the more specific and rigid, the better, and a set of incentives, the smarter, the better, will obviate the need for people doing the right thing because it's the right thing. There is no set of rules that captures every situation you face, and every incentive that anyone has ever designed, people have found a way to game so that they do whatever it is that's being measured. And I know Seref keeps emphasizing metrics, but the problem with metrics is that metrics can be distorted by clever employees and stop measuring what they're meant to be measuring in the first place. So you need judgment and you need the will to do the right thing. So there's a moral dimension to the work that almost all of us do that is completely lost in the modern workplace. And I think it's an important component of people getting meaning and purpose. They feel like every day at the end of the day, I've made somebody's life a little bit better. And that's a good thing. My organization has made somebody's life a little bit better. The trouble is that what cultivating practical wisdom requires is that people running the operation cede a fair amount of autonomy and discretion to the people they manage. So are people at the top of organizations willing to give up control? And I mentioned this also in connection with what Lauri said a few minutes ago, you know, having people reflect on how their work is going, what they get satisfaction out of and what they don't, only works if the people at the top actually buy into the mission. You know, you can create a software that is supposed to improve people's lifestyle health habits. And you find out that the reason that the company has installed this is that they want to reduce the cost of their health insurance. They don't care about the welfare of employees. They just want their health insurance bill to go down. So if people live a slightly healthier lifestyle, it'll save the company money. It develops a kind of cynicism on the part of the workforce that this tool is really not meant to serve the employees. It's meant to serve the employer. And once that kind of cynicism sets in, I think it's very hard, no matter how good the product, for the product to have the desired effect because people are suspicious of the intentions behind the product. So it's really important that the people you sell Pandatron to understand what its purpose is and endorse its purpose so that their employees won't start to think that it's just another trick designed to maintain employee allegiance and improve the bottom line. Maybe I'm being too cynical here, but you know,
you're hitting the nail with the hammer, but please continue. I would love to
So if you get buy-in from employers and employers understand that among the things that this could lead to is an insistence on more autonomy, not less, from the workers, more of a input into what the company is going to be, what direction the company is going to be going on in the future, and that's okay with them, then it seems to me this is a gift. You know, the gift of Pandatron is essentially what you're telling people is don't just do something, sit there. That is, you need to pause and think about what you do, where you are, where you want to be a few years from now, what your enterprise does. And you keep people busy enough and they have no time to think about any of those things. And the result, I think, is an erosion of the enthusiasm that they might have had when they started. So you're getting people to sit and think about the quality of their work life.
And Lauri, I want to ask you a question, but thank you for the plug, Barry. Again, I do want to say that we're very proud to say that the body of work of Barry is being embedded into the constructs that Lauri does within Pandatron, and is because of this kind of wisdom that he has. So we're so happy with this relationship. It is very meaningful that you allow us to have your research and your body of work, and I want to thank you for that personally, because I know it's going to help a lot of people.
You're making me blush.
But Lauri, we're talking about practical wisdom, and if I bring it down to to actual decision making, any potential cases you can give us once the content that you build and the reactions of people where maybe there was an improvement in decision making that you're seeing because of those constructs.
Yeah, sure. Before I get to that, I actually want to answer to Barry's challenge, which I think is very, very meaningful here. Where let me tell about the person who I design all the content for. His name is Jerry. Jerry is a 50-year-old mid-manager who has, in a sense, signed out mentally already a while ago. He's not interested in new things. He would prefer to just go home and not talk to a chatbot about whatever the people in the change and transformation department bought. However, if he actually does give a shot to it, he realizes that instead of it trying to somehow coerce you into a certain way of thinking, it actually starts with the assumption that you are, probably not bought at the very beginning, and there are reasons for it, and these reasons are meaningful information of who you are as a person. What are your expectations? What are your preferences? What are your values? And if the dialogue goes into this mode where Jerry is understood on Jerry's own terms,
Right.
then at that point, the actual AI adoption can start, because then instead of Jerry buying into propaganda, Jerry is provided the means to think for himself what is actually valuable. And where I remember actually we had a conversation with Barry a couple of months ago where we were talking about the habit research. And I think I really reflect on it afterwards, where you made this very important note that in building new habits, there is this tendency to keep our attention on this mechanical habit loop design. While that does matter to some extent, the actual meat of the matter is the identity. Who am I becoming by the choices that I make or don't make? Who I want to become in the long term. And this is precisely like how I want to design Pandatron, that it asks you, who do you want to become in this organizational context? And then helps you figure out the way with technological means on how to get there by sitting down and thinking through for 10 to 20 minutes. And that's basically it. You don't have to get addicted. You don't have to doom scroll anything. You actually, outside of the session, go and do something that is actually meaningful instead of talking to a robot. But talking to a robot for a little while, because it is, for whatever reason, very difficult for people to sit down and actually think, is actually meaningful. And I have seen this with thousands of users already.
And I do think that, if we can get people to reflect on their purpose, on their reason for being there, I think it makes a big difference. And I think what I also find interesting is that, remember, one organization asked me, can you guys pull information from our job descriptions, performance management, resumes, applications, and recommend career paths to people? And I remember telling her, do you want to have children as employees or do you want grown-ups? And he says, no, grown-ups. And I said, listen, if you want grown-ups, build an AI coach that can help you reflect on where the organization is going, its purpose, its future, help you reflect on your skills, and then help you reflect on how to align those, and they'll help you reflect on how to have career conversations with your leader, and you're going to build a dynamic, relationship that can help you implement major transformations. And when it comes to major transformations, Seref, I want to go back to you. When it comes to AI implementations, what have you seen? If I know it's hard to synthesize this in just a few minutes, but what would you say are the key points of when it comes to AI adoption? What makes successful ones with the ones that are not successful, based on what you've seen in your extensive experience?
No, it's there is one thing that really separates, not just for AI, but overall any change or innovation that is a subject. It is everything for us as a firm starts and ends with the user. So when you think about what we are doing, AI is really created by the people for the people. It is not something that will replace, in some cases, maybe change the way the operations are going to work. But that's not the intent. The intent is to make things easier, faster, more effective, etc. So the goals are more to make people's lives better at the end. So
Right.
when we think about how this feedback mechanism is working today, when you think about the managements and how they are making decisions, those that are not really taking into account what their customers, or in some cases employees, the user is different, what they are really saying, where the need is, what needs to really happen, what if you changed, what would really make the most amount of impact. If that is not in place, the results are oftentimes suboptimal because the management thinks one thing, but the real problems are elsewhere. And we have seen this so many times. Why we have a thriving business is one of the reasons, I have to say. So those that are really successful are the ones that take this into account to the T, as in that's the core of their thinking. They start where the need is and then expand from it to say, this is the best way to handle it. This kind of AI application can actually help us solve this problem, and then design around it. And then you know what the success metrics are. And then you know where you have to give autonomy to various points. And then you know where you can incorporate it and then really just empower your employees, other users by it. So it is just this train of thought that really starts with the user needs that really separates successful ones from the unsuccessful ones the most.
To put it in slightly different terms, this comes back to what you've already agreed to, which is that things have to start with purpose. And in this case, the purpose is what's the need?
Completely agree.
And there's one other thing, Lauri, that related to what you said that hadn't occurred to me when we last had a long conversation. And that is, the world has become a very lonely place for a lot of people. There are very few people who can simply sit down and think their way through a problem. But you can talk your way through a problem if you have someone to talk to. And we take it for granted that everybody's got someone to talk to. And I'm not sure that that's true, especially younger people. More and more people are living alone. Fewer and fewer people have serious and long-lasting romantic attachments. It may well be that AI is the best conversation partner a lot of people will have. And, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. But who is it you talk to if you're not talking to the robot? And the answer for a lot of people is nobody.
That's a meaningful conversation, and I would want to build up on that, where I do see that while I do see that AIs are becoming these confidants for many people, because many people just don't have the privilege of actually being surrounded by a person who knows how to listen. This is freaking rare for most people, unfortunately. However, and this is like what we have done in Japan, for example, where we focus a lot on systemic coaching by working with top Japanese executive coaches who have mastered the art, where they actually start from the idea of humans being relational, and therefore the AI is used to help people to reflect on how they are influencing others and how others are influencing them. Who do they admire in the workplace? What kind of conversations should be had, but there is just some kind of difficulty that is like somehow difficult to express. Is there difficulty getting and accepting feedback? Does it feel like an attack on oneself? And so on and so forth. So actually, I believe we can design AIs not just, in a way that we would just become more and more isolated, but we would become more socially capable and more responsive. Because if we exclude these harder skills from the work, it is really just getting along with employees, with your colleagues, with your customers. That is fundamental. And if people don't have the shared capability for that, I mean, it's going to be grim, but at the same time, businesses, don't function as well as they should, and everyone is having quite a bad time.
Yeah, and I think that, and I want to ask you, Seref and Barry, I go from Lauri to Barry to Barry. It's very confusing. I'm trying to pronounce it in the correct language. But Barry, I want to talk to my experience with one of your colleagues in content here, Pandatron, which is Amy Edmondson. I did a track on psychological safety that Lauri put together, and I wasn't talking to a human. I was actually at a karaoke bar in Helsinki waiting for Lauri, some of the colleagues, to learn that I sing worse than I thought. However, in that reflection of 10, 15 minutes, it made me a better leader by reflecting on how I could have better meetings and be a more empathic leader. And to this day, I remember that experience. And I feel it has had an impact on my work, my relationships with others. So yeah, I can attest to the fact that talking to that AI coach allows you to have better relationships with others. So it's not about taking human relationships away, is making you better, at human relationships. But I want to go back to look at the forest again and not look at the trees. And I want to ask Seref, when it comes to AI adoption and other, technology implementations, would you say that sometimes AI adoption may, in the rush of getting there, may add unnecessary complexity for organizations?
Absolutely. If it is, and we talked about the fundamentals already, the framework that is required. So when you don't take the time, that stepping back is very, very important. You don't take the time, you may make very dire mistakes, and I will explain some of them. If you don't have the right objectives, it may end up being a total chaos between the expectations and then that what really happens. If you don't necessarily have the right way of thinking about an investment, you may not necessarily see the results as the return that you're expecting. If you don't necessarily do it for the people, you may create a lot of chaos, turmoil between your employees and the management. And sometimes if you rush to really get, for example, a lot of incumbents came up with the AI application as the first, but really some of the best solutions are being offered by the innovators, for the companies that are not as maybe old, a decade old, but newer, and they are much more focused. They know what they exist for, and they become the gold standard. And if you don't take the time to evaluate, you really just attach it, connect it to your objective, and see who you really partner with carefully, you can make a lot of mistakes. So bottom line is, speed is not always the best path. And if you don't necessarily have to do it, taking a step back and following all these steps carefully can get you the best results. And we can see the tangible examples of that from where we sit, working with our clients. It's about going through this framework of thinking carefully and taking the time to do it.
Barry, I'm going to ask you one of, it's what we call the contrarian questions, because Seref just talked about perhaps speed. I want to ask you from the efficiency standpoint. We're trying to be efficient. Can too much efficiency make those organizations less effective as they're looking at the AI adoption imperative?
I'm so glad you asked the question, because I've written an article about the benefits of inefficiency. It was prompted by COVID and the astonishing lack of preparedness that COVID unmasked. There were no warehouses stockpiling the things that everybody needed. And why was that the case? And the answer is that if you're trying to run a lean and mean organization and maximize efficiency, which is what economists tell us should be the goal, then of course you're not going to have warehouses. All they are is wasted assets, right? So that's fine as long as everything works exactly as you expect. But when something goes wrong, it's a catastrophe. Things blow up. And so I think, friction is a nuisance when you're trying to maximize car mileage. If only we could get rid of friction, life would be better. Yes, except if it snows and you're driving home on an icy road, you beg for a little bit of friction. And I think we have all been sort of duped into thinking that there are no icy roads and that slowing down and making sure that the decision when you make it is a wise decision is a far more intelligent strategy than adopting the latest thing because it's the latest thing and then thinking you'll figure out how to use it on the fly going forward. So I am actually a fan of adding friction or adding something that slows people down so that they think more and act a little bit less. And you talked earlier, Robert, about how the pace of change has exploded. What that tells me is that what I just said to you is anathema to most people in most workplaces. The idea that you want to slow down, they think, well, you're just old. You're part of the last generation. We can't listen to you anymore.
Oh, I disagree, but your warehouse analogy, I'm going to use it to explain my dad body and my fat in my belly from here on. And I'll say Barry Schwartz told me that it was a good idea. Lauri, if you can sort of bring us together from the perspective of Pandatron, if you will, what are the AI adoption perceptions that you think Pandatron challenges in terms of what it does and how it can be used more effectively for better adoption?
Before I get into that, I want to thank you, Barry, for in a sense raising the necessity of meaningful friction to the discussion. And also here at this point, I want to loop this together to the joke that was presented in the very beginning. This meaningful friction of people actually slowing down is precisely the reason why we have our hackathon/labor camps, because it is important. It is really important to constantly take a step back in a safe environment with people who you are working with, and really thinking through: are we doing the right things for the right reasons with the right way? Because if we're not, then we are sliding on the black ice and eventually just crashing to the wall. And I think that there is this constant sense of fear of missing out, this fear of competition coming. There is, in a sense, paranoia and mania even that is driving businesses, which in a sense eventually leads to making more and more poor decisions because they never took the time to step back and asking the question that are we doing the right things. So even though it is very highly recommended to actually invite people together and sit down, make some nice meals and think things through together, the second best option is Pandatron, and that is way cheaper than doing that, which is that you scale the reflection, you provide that calm, quiet space of thinking where people are in a safe, non-judgmental manner,
right,
understood on their own terms, because people really do care. If people are not allowed to have a say on when they think things are going wrong, they eventually shut down and get alienated, and you are not having employees, you are having people who, are just basically just trying to get their own cut instead of contributing meaningfully to the whole. And modern businesses need that. They need people who are constantly thinking, what is the necessary thing? What is the right thing? How can I contribute to the whole? And this leads to the other layer of Pandatron, which is the data analytics, where we, in a sense, want the organization to see in an anonymized manner naturally and with the consent of the users, the organization that people don't talk about but what they think about, understanding what are the patterns, because one person has a limited perspective. But if you have tens or hundreds of thousands of people thinking of the same problem of are we doing the right things in this business, that leads to incredibly powerful things that is impossible, absolutely impossible to outsource to any consultants. Just because and this is something that is now made possible with AIs. We actually have the chance of making wiser workplaces. And I think we should take the shot now that we have it, because if we don't, then we are going to crash through the wall.
Yeah, and maybe that's a whole topic for another podcast, which is traditional analytics versus, leveraging, AI coaching conversations and the kind of organic reporting you get out of them. And guys, we could go on for a long time. We far exceeded the time here. The topic was how smart organizations make poor AI choices. And I really hope that the people that will listen to the podcast learn from this, and maybe if you're making good choices already, great. Maybe this can help you make greater choices. And the ones that were making poor choices, maybe make good choices now. Barry, Seref, Lauri, thank you for being here today. Everybody listening, you'll find us in YouTube, Spotify. We're going to drop this also on LinkedIn, on our website. And of course, visit us at Pandatron AI. And thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Ready to Transform. If you enjoyed it, we've got more for you beyond the podcast. Join Pandatron's Learning Lab for early access to our newest AI coaching tracks, a chance to network with industry peers, and exclusive sessions with some of the world's top thought leaders. You'll find the details in the episode description. See you next time, and until then, be ready to transform.